I'm gonna be blunt. I've done almost no coding in the last month because I've been so busy on the back and forth with a character artist. It's been over 500 emails to date, and some of these take a while. I have to download something, test it out, diagnose problems, make decisions, and it's often the first thing I do when I get up, the last thing I do before I go to bed, and in between, it's hard to really focus on much of anything else because I never know when that next email is going to come in, and I know that sometimes it's time sensitive, that the artist is going to be blocked until I respond. So I'm eager to get back to normal and spend most of my time coding again, but in the meantime, pretty much all I've gotten done this week has been experimenting with graphics in Godot to try to make things look a little bit better. Starting with shadows, I noticed some very strange artifacts working with omnilights, and even if I adjust the bias and contact settings, it doesn't look right. Okay, I swear that didn't work when I tried it before, but the shadow map is used far more efficiently for higher fidelity shadows if I use a spotlight instead. But if I use multiple spotlights, I don't seem to get shadows from all of them, which I don't quite understand. I'm also seeing some banding artifacts on the walls, which in theory might be solved with the contact and bias parameters again, but despite my best efforts, I just can't get rid of the wall banding without breaking the shadows on the floor. But apparently shadows have been completely overhauled for the upcoming Godot 4.0, so I'm hoping that'll fix these problems. Next, I want to talk about materials. So for those who don't know, a material is essentially a combination of a shader and some parameters for that shader. Colors, textures, multipliers, UV offsets, things like that. Now unfortunately in Godot 3.2 there's no way to put a different color on individual objects without having either a different material for each one, or you could potentially use a multi-mesh instance and use per instance data to color each instance, but it's hard to make that work with something like a skeletal structure with different meshes attached, because I can't just use the normal animation process to move those meshes around if it's a multi-mesh instance. It's probably possible to, say, copy the transforms from each mesh into the multi-mesh instance data and make it work somehow, but it would be kind of complicated and I'd rather not. If I were designing the renderer myself, I might do something like have a buffer that holds the shader parameters for every object in the scene, and then the shader can pull from some position in that buffer to color the object. Then I wouldn't need any material changes or pipeline state changes at all, but I don't think it's worth trying to dig into the Godot codebase to understand how its renderer works so that I can try to change it, especially since I'm not very familiar with OpenGL. Most of my experience is with Direct3D. But once again, this is something that's being addressed in Godot 4.0. They're adding the ability to put shader parameters per mesh without needing a different material resource for each one. But for now, I'm just going to deal with having more materials in my scene and hope that it's still fast enough, because at least I'm only dealing with tens of objects, not hundreds. It's a simple indie game, so hopefully performance won't be too big of a problem. But I'm getting more and more eager for that 4.0 update, because aside from the shadows and the per object material properties, it seems like every time I'm Googling for some issue that I'm having, there's a common theme. Most things are fixed or improved for the 4.0 renderer, which is a complete rewrite of the whole system, and it doesn't necessarily make sense to try to backport or re-implement the fix for the old renderer. It's no secret that 3D graphics are one of Godot's weak points for now, but 4.0 is going to be a huge step toward closing that gap with other engines. And the question now is, when is it coming? Last year the thought was that it would be mid-2020, but it makes sense, especially with the Epic Mega Grant, that they might be rethinking their roadmap and expanding scope, and delays happen anyway, so who knows. I'm not going to hold up the release of Cargo Defense waiting for 4.0, but I'm really hoping it gets here in time for me to take advantage of it. Or maybe I'll switch to 4.0 in a post-release update, who knows. So I guess I'll end with just a few points on what's new this week. For one thing, I've dropped the idea of using a mask texture because it's just not necessary anymore. The hair, facial hair, and eyes are all separate meshes, so I don't really need different dynamic colors within the same mesh anywhere anymore. I've also solved the animation merging issue. It turns out that the rig I was using was incompatible with the Godot Game Tools add-on for Blender, but I can also manually create an action from the animations on one FBX and then apply them to another. And the character artist is also redoing the rig to be more compatible with Mixamo, so hopefully I won't have to do that manually once that's done. I've also started work on the system for randomly putting together characters with different hair color, skin color, facial hair, etc., but I'm not sure if it's going to be finished by the time this video is done. One way or another though, this character art stuff will be done soon, because it's already over budget and I've had to set a hard limit so it doesn't get out of control. Hopefully that means next week I'll be back to full speed ahead on coding, and in the meantime it always helps me out if you hit the like button, spread the word, and subscribe if you haven't already, and of course, thanks for watching.